Coming of Age, a fanfiction by Ian Flynn. Oh, and of course it's called a tragedy because this guy wrote the Mecha Sally arc. We start off with the narration telling us that the sky looked wrong, being full of thunderclouds. And we're told that this particular Robotnik wants nothing but destruction since his massive robot army, in his bid for global domination, leveled all the cities in its path. Normally Eggman's about ruling. He only tried to destroy a city one time in the games, in SA1. So did he go insane after all his losses to Sonic? Because the narration's talking as if he hasn't taken over the world before. So this is the game's Eggman. And yet he's being taken super seriously. So naturally, I'd assume this was an Archie fanfiction right away. I don't know why the hell the text is centered in alignment. I've never seen that in fanfiction before. We're also told about how a Badnik army severely damaged a villa. And there's this new character named Jade who is sad to see such things. And she's a Raven Mobian. So what's the point of having an original character in a Sonic fanfiction be the first one we see? Aren't we supposed to have the real Sonic characters be the main focus? Already he's committed one of fanfiction's biggest mistakes. Like, this is probably breaking a taboo of fanfiction right from the start. But let's see how this goes. He doesn't even bother to tell you what color her top is, just that it's strapless. And she's got a jade-colored scarf. I picture her as Ebony the cat for some reason. She plans to get what she came for, and flies through the ruined villa that used to be owned by a famous rich family. And to add to the level of tragedy, they're one of the few rich families that gave back to their community. But this won't keep Jade from robbing their graves. In a Sonic story, we're told she had looked over the stolen house plans a lot before she had shown up. How the hell did she get those? This is the premise of the story, and she hadn't counted on the villa being severely damaged before she came there. She is worried that she's being watched, which is probably clumsy foreshadowing to the fact that she is being watched, probably by a security camera of Eggman's. She gets to the master bedroom with a bed buried under half of the floor above it, and the narration just has to mention that this is how the couple in the house met their end. We could have just had it be left ambiguous. Seriously, it makes sense of Eggman to do this for the evils if and only if he either went insane from fighting Sonic too much, or this was Fleetway where he became evil from absorbing all the world's evil. As it stands, he has nothing to gain from this. No one would. And even Sonic X had Eggman lampshade how stupid, pointless destruction was. Anyways, Jade goes to the safe door, and is surprised that it's locked, since a lot of rich people she robbed didn't bother to lock their safes. You don't use the term robbed unless it's being taken from the person in front of them by force. He must have meant to say stolen. She sees a huge amount of wealth in the safe, and then all of a sudden something jerks on her scarf, and a shrill voice screams to leave that alone. Since the people who own the money in that safe aren't going to be doing anything with it, I don't see why Jade should be stopped. So I hope Flynn wasn't expecting me to root against her. She finds herself flying in a tight circle, pulls the scarf free dropping to the ground, and she flies forward with her beak aimed at her attacker. Since she realizes it's just a little girl, she averts her beak at the last second and merely knocks her against the wall so she wouldn't outright kill her. He meant to say avert there, not adverted. And then Jade holds the thrashing girl in place, and the girl has wings. So are we ever going to actually see any actual Sonic characters? We learn from the narration that the rich family had been a family of bats, who were nocturnal. Except Rouge isn't nocturnal, so that makes no sense with Sonic. The girl tears up when she's told her parents can't use the money in the vault anymore, and kicks Jade's leg, and rushes to her parents' bedside, and gets upset. Then Jade spots a large black gun van pulling up outside, and some Beetle robot surveillance drones get sent out of the back of it, and their spotlights hit the wall of the villa. Jade just assumes that Gunn is here for the wrong reasons. Does Flynn not trust the military in general? This is not the only time that he portrays Gunn as just pure evil. Well, warning bells go off in her when she looks at the girl again. She picks her up, telling her to shush, and she tells her some bad guys are coming for them, and she has to get her out of here. Never mind that Gunn stopped being evil 50 years ago in the games. The girl accuses her of lying, and they get spotted by robots and soldiers outside the villa. Jade jumps up the mound of the collapsed debris on the bed, and reaches the floor above, And when the girl points to one of the doors saying that way, Jade hammers open the doors with her beak because apparently she could do that. She keeps following her direction and reaches a large playroom where the forested ground behind the villa is nearby. The girl goes to get her Chow doll and lets Jade carry her again because she's her only hope right now. Jade's beak knocks the window from the frame and she starts flying to the night, and they don't get any sort of pursuit. Apparently, the flying beetle bots miss them. So they finally escape that tense and confusing scene where Gunn was the bad guy for no reason, and get to Jade's mansion. At least the narration acknowledges that Eggman's insane for destroying buildings. So Jade flies into her house through the skylight and gets to the sink, and uses a wet washcloth to clean the soot from the girl's face. Why did she have soot? She then asks why she has scratches on her, and confusingly, she got them from sneaking around following her. Well, at least that's not nearly as stark as her parents doing that to her, which I immediately assumed Flynn would write. Jade compliments her for managing to catch her off guard when she's a professional thief, and the girl slightly smiles as I still don't know her name, and she should have told her name by now. Why establish an OC main character and not tell the audience her name right away? That's common sense, to get you attached to her. Instead, Flynn is more interested in telling us the name of the girl's doll, and telling us that the girl's grandmother made it for her. Then all of a sudden it turns out the little girl is Rouge, when she was a kid. I should have seen this coming since she's a white bat. Her coming from a rich family and being raised by a thief does make perfect sense as a backstory for her, with the rich family thing explaining why she's so spoiled and materialistic and entitled to the point where she's fixated on jewels. I always assumed that was the case. So why the fuck didn't Flynn establish this backstory for Rouge in something canon? I don't want to be told how her parents died, that's obviously too dark. But other than that, this is the perfect backstory. I just wish we knew it was Rouge from the start. That's common sense. Then after a time skip that doesn't even bother to explain how much time had passed, the narration tells us that Jade's worried about the risk she's taking bringing Rouge into a bad environment. Because while Mogul conducted himself with some class, his cronies didn't. So this is an Archie fanfiction. And we're told that Rouge is already starting to be a preteen, and Rouge says she knows that she has to be quiet and ignore everyone around her. And because she sounded impatient, Jade wishes Rouge was still a sweet little girl instead of a moody teenager. It would be better writing if we were immediately told why the hell the gun soldiers were being portrayed as the bad guys earlier, instead of coming to investigate what Eggman did to Rouge's villa though. Why was Jade so convinced that they weren't going to be nice to an innocent little girl? We'll never know now because Flynn didn't care about that. I'm just waiting for Jade to meet a grimdark end. Like any second now. Cause we never see her in the games, so that has to be the explanation why. Rouge and Jade walk down a narrow alley, and Jade knocks on a small rectangular slit, saying she wants to see Mogul. The door opens after a grunting reply, and they walk into a brightly lit decorated office full of gold. So how did Mogul ever get gold? Seriously, how? This applies to Archie too. We never saw him dig for it, and how would he know where to dig? Apparently, after all the time he wandered the earth, I'm expected to assume he just randomly stumbled into a gold mine, and I guess he uses magic to force anyone away from it that challenged him. He's psychic, so I guess his powers helped him find gold. Anyways, Rouge sees what she assumes are bodyguards in the four corners of the room. Why would Mammoth freaking Mogul ever think he needs bodyguards? Especially when you consider that Flynn had him turn out to be a literal Order of Ixis wizard, even without a bunch of Chaos Emeralds, which would mean he has elemental powers, rather than just psychic powers and simulacrum powers like everyone assumed. But it turns out these so-called bodyguards are Predator Hawk, Sergeant Simeon, Lightning Lynx, and a neurotic-looking Flying Frog. So already Flynn had it in his mind that Flying Frog would be this crazy, wacky guy, when before Flynn, literally no different personality from the rest of the Destructics, who all just generic bad guys with nothing interesting going on about them. I hope they get destroyed or beaten up in the story, instead of just standing around or getting away with bad things way too easily, like normal, because they're not likable people at all. And somehow, only just now did Rouge notice Mammoth Mogul between them. Somehow this is the first time Mogul's ever finding out that Jade had an apprentice, even though apparently Mogul's known Jade for some time. Probably because Jade can fly, so he thinks she was useful to him, and she lives in the neighborhood with him. But apparently this is the first time she's ever taken Rouge to meet Mogul. Maybe because she thinks she's coming of age, hence the story title. Mogul says that Eggman ruling the world and some kid heroes are of little concern to him right now. for some reason, on its own planet. This is why Moggle's not a believable character either. He says he's been doing research on Eggman, and from what he's figured out with no explanation, Eggman's gotten a lot of funding from the philanthropists he killed for their fortune, which he used to fund his last attack. This has to be set in an alternate universe where there's no roboticization or anything, because otherwise, why the hell would Eggman kill anyone instead of roboticizing them, and making them useful to him? That's not Archie. But anyways, if Moggle does research on Eggman by using his psychic powers, which I have to assume, then why did he take so long to find out about this? Moggle says that he doesn't plan on catching Eggman, because if he did, that'd end the series. So we can't have him be useful and do the remotely realistic thing. He really should have just been in another dimension. He says that he's found a few funds evaded Eggman's grip and remained frozen with the lack of an heir, which worries Jade, who's sitting on his desk. He tells her to acquire the funds for him, which are physically held in the vaults of Prison Island. And Moggle tells Jade to make sure it doesn't turn out like an incident for her in London. Why would Flynn keep referencing that without bothering to tell us what happened right away? Well, maybe because he's too lazy to think of what actually did happen, that's why. And Moggle insinuates that Mimics never forget. Really? Does he remember when he was in diapers? Don't people with photographic memories tend to be depressed because they can't forget what they want to? Anyways, there's a time skip, and we're told about humans and Mobians on a cruise ship over the Caribbean, because apparently there's a sea called that in Mobius too. And it's a ship with both Mobians and their hated rivals the Overlanders on it. This is definitely not the Prime Dimension, that's for sure. So it's so unoriginal to rip off the name Caribbean instead of having a brand new name. Jade and Rouge lounge in the sun. They waste time talking about sunblock usage and how the guys will admire them when Rouge isn't even of age yet. And really, this whole talk between them is just padding. All it does is remind me that they're close when I already assumed that. The clear hot day turns into a cloudy night as I think of how oddly nice it was of Eggman to allow cruise ships to exist like it's nothing when this is the same guy who destroys buildings and philanthropists for no reason. And there's no indication that the freedom fighting groups are actively protecting this cruise. I guess it's a secret cruise that hopes Eggman won't find out about it. Rouge and Jade fly on the hot air from the ship and strong sea breezes close to the water to conserve their energy. I like that extra detail at least. For once, it gives care and thought to the writing. Eventually, they get to Prison Island and make their way through the jungle where they have to avoid a few robots, and somehow Jade figures out that there's a hollow boulder with a ladder below it so they can get to an underground maintenance shaft. It makes sense if Jade at least tripped on the boulder to discover what was under it by accident, but instead she just magically knows it was a trick to hide a ladder for no reason. They go down the ladder and get threatened by the gunshots of a hunter robot that Rouge kicks at. Everything begins to blur for her in a panic. There's way too many lights and moving bodies, and she gets thrown off balance. Then she ends up being trapped in a bubble of blue gel from a robot and falls to her side, and Jade's in the same gel. It turns out they've been ambushed by gun soldiers with their weapons trained on them. And Jade snarks at Rouge for disobeying her order to go back up. A pair of ranking officers approach them. And because execution apparently isn't authorized for trespassers to Prison Island, that doesn't happen. Instead, he tells them to take Rouge and Jade to cells, and separate cells at that. And they want a full background check on them. And one of the soldiers plans on informing General Tower. So that's where Flynn first used his Tower last name for Abraham Tower then. Such a dumb last name. Of course, it makes sense that a fanfiction writer would end up imposing his fanon out of nowhere on the comic after he got hired. That's why Flying Frog went crazy, that's why Bean showed up. Rouge keeps track of each turn they make as she's forced to march down a central tower. And oh, how convenient that she and Jade are put in cells right next to each other. Because both cells right next to each other were empty. When I read they were going to be put in separate cells, I assumed this wouldn't happen. The two of them are left alone and break free of the gel since it went hard and shattered. And by ridiculous coincidence, Rouge was put in the same cell Gerald Robotnik was put in because there's math all over the walls. Because video games. And they lampshade how useless that is to Rouge. Then Jade reveals that Rouge memorized too many turns. The soldiers somehow thought to take them down the same corridors more than twice, so Rouge would be so turned around that they would have her again before she reached the exit. Well, that was surprisingly prepared of those soldiers. Why would they ever assume they would escape and plan for that? Most of the time, this redundant practice of the soldiers would just be a waste of time. They're oddly smart to be so prepared. It feels like such padding how long Jade and Rouge are in their cells. I don't need to be told about a commander reading out Jade's criminal history to us. Why is he wasting her time telling her stuff she already knows about herself? He wouldn't do that. We're finally told what the London incident was. Jade stole a gun lab experiment and sold it to the highest bidder. And Rouge pointlessly has a real name that sounds stupid. Rouge gets upset when she learns for the first time that all her family's financial assets were confiscated. And she says she doesn't remember what her parents did for a living, but insists they were good people who donated to charity. Then out of complete nowhere, it turns out they donated money to Robotnik instead. That came out of nowhere. Flynn just doesn't want to write a really good, nice character when he can make an irritating one instead. Rouge's parents had lost bids on very lucrative plots before she was born, and when Eggman attacked, a lot of their holdings were obliterated, and they would have received insurance checks in the millions, and their fortune would have tripled in a day. So that's why Rouge's inheritance was seized. They took it from them so they wouldn't donate it to Eggman. Seriously, am I really expected to believe Rouge's parents were happily donating money to Eggman? We're missing a step here. We're not being told that her parents were threatened into it. We were told in the narration, which is normally 100% reliable in fiction when it's not from a first-person perspective, that they were charity donating philanthropists. But that'd be too nice and likable. So we gotta have a dark and annoying twist out of nowhere instead. Because Flynn just loves vilifying characters we grew to like. So Commander Green tells them that he'll discuss what will happen to both of them, and he'll inform them when it comes to a decision. And hours later, because apparently they still hadn't made that decision by this point, Jade hears Rouge crying because she was upset about what her parents had done. I really think that was a stupid twist. Jade tells Rouge that over 10 years ago she was told by Mogul to get a Chaos Drive energy source from Gunn in London. But on her way back to the States, as opposed to the United Federation or Station Square, this has to take place in another dimension. On the way back to the States, she was contacted by another party, and she sold it to him for double Mogul's price. She had to pull a number of free jobs from Mogul to stay alive after that. I refuse to believe Mogul would have kept her alive after even her first betrayal. He already had Predator Hawk for an ally who could fly. And aren't Chaos Drives in every robot of Guns? Anyway, she only thought she had gotten into Mogul's good graces again. Somehow he found out about Rouge and her family's ridiculous connection to Robotnik. With Rouge there, he knew she couldn't openly refuse or she'd get suspicious. So Mogul intentionally had them get imprisoned in cells. But why? If you wanted revenge on them, if you didn't want to get the money, then why didn't he just kill them and get it over with if he wanted to get rid of his minions so badly? Wouldn't that feel more satisfying? Also, Mogul shows that he can teleport in Archie multiple times, even before Flynn, and he's a psychic. You'd think that he would just psychically learn about where any treasure is that he wants to get, and just teleport there and get it himself. He would never need to tell other people to steal stuff for him. He could just teleport to one treasure hoard after another and steal much faster than he would if he left that job to someone else. He's supposed to be a genius. And Rouge is mad at Jade for not telling her about her parents donating to Robotnik and sparing her the truth. Apparently, Jade already knew about that, instead of learning it here for the first time, like would be keeping things simple. I assumed that was the case. You'd think she'd appreciate not having to know a depressing truth if she doesn't have to for most of her life. And she says that lying and trickery is in Jade's nature, and she's infected her with it. There's no way her being angsty about being a lying trickster would be in character for Rouge. She'd be proud of it and thank Jade for it. Then Abraham Tower goes to Rouge and says that she can join Gunn to pay off her debt to society and be cleared of any charges. I guess the only reason he's offering her this is because she can fly, and therefore talent would be worth using. But he could hire other bats. And this has to take place in an alternate dimension, because in the Prime one, well, this would be confusing. Was Rouge's family a family of Mobians in Station Square? Because Station Square was full of humans who were isolated from the world and were surprised to meet Mobians for the first time in the adventure adaptation. So Rouge's family wouldn't be living with them to the point where Gunn would know about Rouge's family history. And her parents wouldn't be able to donate to Robotnik because they would be isolated from him. There's no way this can be Rouge's backstory and Archie as a result, because Gunn wasn't formed yet when Rouge was a kid, and wouldn't even know any Mobians existed yet, so they wouldn't have made her an orphan and held the actions of her parents against her. Another reason why Rouge's parents shouldn't have had that dumb plot twist. Gun was only formed in Archie after Station Square wasn't hidden anymore. Because now it's needed, because of the mountain's destruction. And now for the stupidity to kick in, as if there wasn't enough. The same logic for them hiring Rouge for Gun should have applied to Jade as well. She can fly too. At no point does the Gun commander explain why he's hiring Rouge for Gun. So I'm left to assume he's doing it because she can fly. So why can't he hire Jade for the same reason? Instead, she's going to be left to stay in the cell and eventually spend life in prison. That's extremely arbitrary. I always assumed that she'd be killed off in ambush by Gun or some criminals. I'm sure that'd be too dark, but this isn't? But no, that would have made too much sense. And even though Jade raised her, Rouge doesn't even bother looking back at her, so she hates her now for keeping one secret from her she was better off not knowing. This is a lot stupider than Sonic hating his uncle for not telling him his parents were still alive. Rouge is only getting lucky here because she's a game character. I hate meta logic. Then we have another vague time skip to Cairo, Egypt, because apparently a place named that exists on Mobius. Again, lazy on originality. And Rouge is in a city part of it, and she wishes Eggman didn't get a base in such a hot place. Wouldn't Archie Eggman always have his base in one place? Robotropolis? He's ruling the world, he'd have no need for multiple bases. Maybe his fan fictions were all written in like a prototype of the Archie reboot universe, because it mixes game history with Archie elements that are just there for no reason. Like he wants to have his cake and eat it too, like he hates some parts of Archie and refuses to acknowledge them, but uses other parts of it. Anyways, Rouge has had 5 drinks already. I like that, at least. And she's given some more by some guy who sent them to a waiter for her. And she blows him a kiss and winks at him. That's Rouge, alright. Then out of complete nowhere, for no reason, Jade sits down at her table. Even though I thought she was gonna spend her life in prison. Because fuck logic. They comment on how they both aged. Rouge gets given back her childhood doll because apparently she lost it for no explained reason. And Jade says it was genius to embroider the escape route on the inside. And she paid a lot of money to get him back to normal. Does she mean the doll? Apparently so. Why did he need to be returned to normal? Jade says she could have sent it a few years earlier though, since her cell was awful. So Rouge broke her out eventually. She eventually had that kind of gratitude. But I'm not given a satisfying explanation about how she broke her out. I'd rather see a story about that than Rouge getting a bunch of drinks from guys flirting with her. Then Rouge flips through a thick folder that Jade stole on the way out. And that folder is Rouge's entire family history. She's got quite the criminal bloodline. Of course, Rouge is happy about this and says she would have sent her Chow doll a full 6 months earlier if she knew she'd do this. So she sent her Chow doll to Jade, and that's how she escaped? How do you get permission to send anything to someone in federal prison? They'd search that thing. And did most people know about Chow in Archie's history? Weren't they all secluded to one spot? Jade says that Rouge is hard to track. That just brings attention to the plot hole that she somehow knew how to find Rouge in the first place in the middle of a big city. Jade says she's not out of their debt yet. I guess that means that Astructix is dead. Oh wait, that's Rouge talking. The text didn't say who was talking. Rouge says she's been hired to infiltrate Eggman's operations for the SE2 adaptation, because of course we have to have a game's plot events happen in the canon that's fanfiction. Even though it can't be canon to the games because it has Archie characters. Jade says she's up to revenge, and she replaced Rouge's file with an even thicker one. Moggles, apparently. Jade says from his playground bully days to his latest corporate piracy. How would there be a file on an immortal being who's been alive for thousands of years? Who would kill anyone who threatened him? And it's hard to keep track of who's talking in this conversation because we're not told who is every single time. That's unprofessional. Jade says she's already had a run-in with Flying Frog. Then Bruce looks up as Fang goes by on a hover bike, and the trailer attached to the bike of it holds a big thing covered with tarp. And a corner comes loose, revealing the glittering of a green gem. So Jade leaves it to Rouge to try to steal from him. And Jade says she needs to keep moving until she reaches her safe house in Moscow, which also exists in Mobius. Because apparently they're going to part ways for no reason at all. even though Jade raised Rouge and she's out of prison. And it was uncharacteristically nice of a jewel thief to leave a ruby as a tip. Seriously, wouldn't jewel thieves stick together? Wouldn't she want company from a kindred spirit? This fanfiction started out way too grim, with Eggman being destructive for no reason, and Rouge's parents being crushed in a vaguely explained attack on their mansion. And it wasn't very impressive that we started out with an original character and took forever to meet a Sonic character. But it did show promise when it revealed a backstory for Rouge. Of course she used to be rich. And it makes even more sense that she was actually raised by a thief, so that's how she learned to be one. And she had to be raised by the thief because her parents got killed. Almost like Flynn has something against the parents of game characters. I'm also impressed that the fanfiction didn't have Rouge get flirted with and threatened by guys when she was on her way to Moggle with Jade, because I saw the word seedy or seedious and read that they were going through an alley, and that just spelled trouble. But surprisingly, they were just fine. And when I expected Jade to be shot to death when she got ambushed by gun soldiers, she wasn't. But it's still a flaw that I was expecting overly dark things to happen, because it made for an ominous atmosphere for the story throughout, where you're always expecting the worst, which isn't enjoyable. I mean, Rouge had a pretty dangerous life being raised by a thief. That wouldn't have you expecting a lighthearted tone where everything's fine for her in the end. Sadly, logic goes out the window instead of the writer showing restraint and ending it there, because somehow it turns out that Rouge's parents were donating to Eggman, and not to charity. I feel lied to because the narration clearly told us her parents were philanthropists donating to charity, giving back to their community. But instead, Flynn goes from establishing these characters as good people to vilifying them to mindless cartoon villains in the span of one story. That's gotta be a record for him, just to have a depressing plot twist. It doesn't make any sense in the Archie universe that Gunn would even know about Rouge's family history when Station Square was totally isolated from the rest of the world, and they just found out Mobians existed in the adventure adaptation. It almost made sense as a good backstory for Rouge. We didn't need the part where her parents were donating to Eggman for no reason. And the fanfiction didn't need to try to pretend it was taking place in Archie because it contradicts it too much to be taken seriously when it comes to that. I mean, come on, there's no The States or Moscow or Cairo in Archie. It was kind of a good fanfiction though. I didn't like the dark tone though. And there was no way Gunn would hire Rouge without also hiring Jade while they're at it. He was too lazy to even explain why they did it. And Jade's escape from prison was barely explained at all, when that was pretty important. But apparently she did escape to have a forced happy ending where she reunites with Rouge. I'm glad she did escape though, because her actually staying in prison forever would have felt too depressing. We didn't need pointless filler with him on the cruise ship talking either.